So hey, Star Trek is funny now.
I'm Captain Kirk!
So hey, Star Trek is intentionally funny now. In 2018, Star Trek Discovery showrunner Alex Kurtzman signed a 5-year deal with CBS to expand the Star Trek franchise into a variety of new series and avenues. And since then, it's led to a wealth of Star Trek content. We've gotten Star Trek Picard, the dark and gritty continuation of the TNG era. We've gotten Strange New Worlds for those who want some classic flavor Trek. We've gotten Star Trek Prodigy, a CG animated show more geared towards children. And finally, Rick and Morty producer Mike McMahon was brought on board to produce a new 2D animated comedy. And so far, all of these shows have been rapturously received and universally praised by both the fandom and the public at large. I deserve an Oscar for saying that with a straight face. Now, this wouldn't be the first 2D animated Star Trek series. That honor goes to the show released in the 1970s, produced by Filmation. But the difference is that this would be the first comedy show of the franchise and focus on a group of lowly ensigns rather than the captain or the senior staff. Also, if we're being honest, this would be the first animated show that was done well. Filmation wasn't really known for their detailed animation quality. Do you like this one shot of Kirk? Well, get used to it because that's what you're gonna see for 90% of the series. The show would be named Lower Decks after a groundbreaking TNG episode that showed an average story through the perspective of the young ensigns helping out the bridge crew. At the time I'm posting this video, the show is in the middle of its 3rd season and it's already been renewed for a 4th, but despite that, the series has attracted its own controversy from longtime Star Trek fans, saying that it isn't true to Gene Roddenberry's vision and is more interested in aping modern animated sci-fi comedies like Rick and Morty. Is any of that true? I don't know, but I'm sitting on 30 years worth of Star Trek knowledge and I got nothing better to do. Pull up a glass of Tranya, kids, you're gonna learn something today. Lower Decks is set in 2380, just after Star Trek Nemesis, the final TNG film. Our story takes place on the USS Cerritos, a California-class starship that specializes in second contact missions, which, unfortunately, aren't as cool as first contact missions. First contact missions are big, important events where you get to establish a rapport with new life and new civilizations. Second contact missions do all the boring stuff we don't usually see on screen. Filing paperwork, getting to know the locals, endowing them with diplomatic trinkets, etc., etc.
We're delivering gifts!
Godspeed, Captain.
Oh!
Our main characters are 4 ensigns who literally live on the lowest deck of the ship. Boimler, Mariner, Tendi, and Rutherford. Boimler is a whiny little suck-up whose only concern is following the rules and advancing his career.
General Corinne is gonna be here any second. Let me do the talking. I've been studying him all day.
Is he single?
Will you just—
Some fans have compared Boimler to Wesley Crusher, but I don't think that's a fair comparison. I mean, unlike Wesley, Boimler actually graduated Starfleet Academy. Set your phasers to burn, boy genius! Next is Tendi, the naive newcomer who works in sickbay and is the first Orion to serve in Starfleet. You might know Orions as the green-skinned people from the original series who were either space pirates or sex workers, a perception Tendi is slowly trying to change.
Dude, Orions are pirates! Pillaging's your whole thing!
Okay, stop! It is not my whole thing. And for your information, many Orions haven't been pirates for over 5 years!
Then there's Rutherford, who works in engineering and constantly has to deal with problems from a cybernetic implant he had installed that replaces the left side of his face. And this thing is so unreliable, it gives Windows 10 a run for its money.
Updating Klingon font.
What? Why do I even need that?
Watch out for the controls! There's something!
But probably the most interesting character is Mariner. Unlike the others, Mariner is an ensign by choice. Or so she says. Her bad attitude has gotten her knocked down in rank more than once, and would have probably gotten her kicked out of Starfleet entirely if it weren't for the fact that her mother, Carol Freeman, is captain of the Cerritos. Something that both parties try to keep secret from the rest of the crew. I'm guessing humanity has evolved past conflicts of interest in the future, too. Speaking of which, let's talk about the senior staff, who were relegated to supporting status for the first time in the franchise. Like Captain Freeman, easily her worst quality is how she micromanages her crew and her family.
Oh, be sure to stroll through the ship as slowly as possible. It's not like we're busy exploring the mysteries of the cosmos!
Next is Jack Ransom, the first officer, who feels like he has all the worst macho aspects of Kirk and Riker dialed up to 11. Doesn't take a ship's counselor to see through him.
Deanna! Can you introduce me to any of your Betazoid friends?
Jack, I sense you exaggerate your confidence in order to mask an ocean of insecurity.
Oh, will they sense that too? I can make that work for me.
Next, we have Lieutenant Shax, who served in the Bajoran Resistance during the Cardassian occupation, which he's still, coping with after the fact.
That's a neat pod, Lieutenant Shax. Did you learn how to do that back on Bajor?
What did you just say?
I just asked if you learned how to throw pots on Bajor.
No.
Oh, do we not talk about Bajor?
You think I had time for anything other than resisting? Fighting fascism is a full-time job!
The staff member who probably has the most interesting backstory is Commander Billups, the chief engineer. The dude looks quiet and unassuming, but get this. He's the crown prince of the planet Hesperia, which was colonized by Renfair types after they discovered that dragons live there. And he'll be forced to take the throne if he ever has sex. So while he's purposefully remained a virgin, this also means that anyone and everyone in the royal court tries to have sex with him whenever he returns home.
Son, are you saying the problem is beyond your engineering acumen?
No. We will just have to run a full diagnostic from the bottom up.
You can run your full diagnostic along my bottom up, my liege.
Nope, thank you.
A group of chaotic bisexuals trying to everything that moves? Sounds like every Ren Fair I've ever been to. Huzzah! My favorite character, though, is Dr. Ta'ana, the Cation doctor voiced by Gillian Vigman. Her design is a reference to Lieutenant Maress from the original animated series. But for my part, her personality is way more memorable. She probably has the most quotable lines in the show.
Want me to clean up those disgusting scars?
No way. No, these are my trophies.
Congratulations, you look like a f***ing scratching post.
You want to goof around? Go work on Starbase 80.
Damn, Starbase 80?
Wait, is this not the Cerritos?
This is the Alhambra. Did you get on the wrong ship?
They all look the same!
Can't say no to a party.
Oh, great! Guess I'll have to shave my
But the big question with Lower Decks as a whole is a tricky one. Can Star Trek be funny? Well, the fact is, Star Trek has been funny for a very long time. Some of the most successful moments in the franchise were built around lighthearted comedy.
Don't tell me. You're from outer space.
No, I'm from Iowa. I only work in outer space.
In fact, if you look back at the original series, a lot of it was very witty. Just to cite an example, Spock and Bones stick in people's minds so much because they made such a hilarious comedy duo.
Your blood pressure is practically non-existent. Assuming you call that green stuff in your veins blood.
The readings are perfectly normal for me, Doctor, thank you. And as for my anatomy being different from yours, I am delighted.
However, that doesn't mean Star Trek doesn't have a difficult relationship with comedy. It's no secret that Star Trek can be funniest when it's trying to be serious. And when Star Trek tries to be funny and fails, it kind of makes you die a little inside.
And have you noticed how your boobs have started to firm up?
Even on a good day, Star Trek comedy is a Russian roulette of quality. For every trouble with tribbles, there's an outrageous Okana. For every Star Trek 4, there's a Star Trek 5. For every Tinker Tailor Dr. Spy, there's a Prophet in Lace. You know what you did! But Mike McMahon has also written for Star Trek in the past. Sort of. McMahon was the founder of the Twitter account TNG Season 8, where he'd pitch ridiculous premises for a fictional Season 8 of Next Generation that never got made. So not only does McMahon know a lot about Star Trek, he's also adept at making comedy out of it. McMahon made it clear from the very beginning that he wanted to avoid punching down on Trek. Instead, he wanted to tell funny stories that could feasibly happen in the Star Trek universe. And that's good to hear, because Star Trek actually has stricter writing rules than you might expect, and it all comes down to a storytelling device called the Roddenberry Box. You guys know Michael Piller? He took over as head writer and showrunner for TNG at the beginning of Season 3. Under his supervision, Next Generation went from this to this.
I am Locutus of Borg.
Piller also wrote the screenplay for Star Trek Insurrection, though I won't hold that against him.
And have you noticed how your boobs have started to firm up?
And documented the writing process in an unpublished novel called Fade In. In that book, he talked about the writing process, Star Trek itself, and working within what he and the writers called the Roddenberry Box. So if you don't mind, I'd like to read a brief excerpt for you.
I happen to like the box. A lot of writers don't. In fact, I think it's fair to say most writers who have worked on Star Trek over the years would like to throw the box away. It may surprise you to learn that when I took over as head writer, the entire writing staff of Star Trek The Next Generation was so frustrated and angry with Gene Roddenberry, they were counting the days before their contracts expired. And indeed, every one of them would leave at the end of the season. He wouldn't let them out of the box and they were suffocating. My first time in Roddenberry's box was during the very first episode I worked on as head writer. We were already in production of Season 3, 4 shows were finished, 22 still to go. There were no scripts and no stories to shoot the following week. Desperate, I bought a spec script that had been sent in from an amateur writer named Ron Moore, who was about to enlist in the US Navy. It was a rough teleplay called The Bonding, and would require a lot of reworking, but I liked the idea. A female Starfleet officer is killed in an accident, and her child, overcome with grief, bonds with a holographic recreation of his mother rather than accept her death. I sent a short description of the story to Rick and Gene. Minutes later, I was called into an urgent meeting in Gene's office. "This doesn't work," he said. "In the 24th century, no one grieves. Death is accepted as a part of life." As I shared the dilemma with the other staff writers, they took a bit of pleasure from my loss of virginity, all of them having already been badly bruised by rejections from Gene. Roddenberry was adamant that 24th century man would evolve past the petty emotional turmoil that gets in the way of our happiness today. Well, as any writer will tell you, emotional turmoil, petty and otherwise, is at the core of any good drama. It creates conflict between characters. But Gene didn't want conflict between our characters. All the problems of mankind have been solved, he said. Earth is a paradise. Now go write drama. His demand seemed impossible at first glance, even self-destructive, and yet I couldn't escape one huge reality. Star Trek worked. Or it had for 30 years. Gene must be doing something right. I accepted it as a challenge. Okay, I told the writers, I'm here to execute Roddenberry's version of the future, not mine. Let's stop fighting what we can't change. These are his rules. How do we do this story without breaking those rules? The next day, I asked for another meeting with Gene and Rick, and here's how I repitched the story. When the boy's mother dies, he doesn't grieve. He acts like he's been taught to act, to accept death as a part of life. He buries whatever pain he may be feeling under this 24th century layer of advanced civilization. The alien race responsible for the accidental death of his mother tries to correct their error by providing a replacement of her. The boy wants to believe his mother isn't dead, but our captain knows she isn't real and must convince the boy to reject the illusion. In order to do so, the boy must cut through everything he's been taught about death and get to his true emotions. He must learn to grieve. The new approach respected Roddenberry's rules and by doing so became a more complex story. He gave his blessing, and I began to learn how Roddenberry's Box forced us as writers to come up with new and interesting ways to tell stories instead of falling back into easier, familiar devices. The rules of behavior in Roddenberry's universe have filled books. There are more books dedicated to the personal histories of Star Trek characters as well as detailed cultural histories of the alien races of the 24th century, and even more books written about Star Trek's science and technology. Gene and his colleagues over the years have created a tapestry that is not easy for new writers to penetrate. My experience has been that our most successful new writers grew up as dedicated fans and already know the Star Trek world inside and out. With the notable exceptions of Ira Stephen Bear, Jerry Taylor, and Joe Menosky, 3 writers in a decade, I rarely had luck hiring experienced writers who would come in and understand the franchise.
Now, the merits of the Roddenberry Box are debatable. In fact, reading that one example, I didn't like how Gene Roddenberry was alienating his writers so much that they felt they had no choice but to leave the show. Especially considering Roddenberry felt that a natural human emotion like grief would be something that humanity would just evolve past. But Michael Piller was right. The Roddenberry Box is what separates Star Trek from other sci-fi. So the question becomes, how do you write good comedy while also sticking to the values of Star Trek? Well, unfortunately, you're probably not going to find it in the pilot, which is the only episode of Lower Decks currently available for free on YouTube. This episode has a lot more violence and gross-out humor than the rest of the show does, and I feel it's given viewers a false impression of what they're in for. If you were worried about Lower Decks being too close to Rick and Morty based on this episode, I don't blame you. It also doesn't help that Mariner is written much, much closer to Rick in this episode, and that just doesn't work the same way. Rick is an overbearing alcoholic asshole, but he's also literally the smartest man in the multiverse, and frequently proves it. You know, when it suits him, but I digress. Mariner doesn't demonstrate any of the same skill, at least not in the pilot. All she does is screw off, get drunk, and make Boimler miserable. In fact, it takes a while for the show to shake off the cringe comedy aspects. And even as a fan, I admit there's 1 or 2 episodes I almost always skip during rewatches. But to me, the show clicks in the 3rd episode, Temporal Edict, where they finally make a comedic premise out of a classic Star Trek trope, buffer time. You know how on the classic shows, Scotty would be like, I need at least 2 hours to fix it, Captain, and Kirk would reply, you've got 15 minutes, and somehow Scotty would pull it off anyway? Well, turns out overestimating is part of Scotty's engineering process. He even explains this to Geordi when they finally meet.
Yeah, well, I told the captain I'd have this analysis done in an hour.
How long would it really take?
An hour?
Oh, you didn't tell him how long it would really take, did you?
Seems pretty reasonable, right? You over-budget time for a task, so if you get it done quickly, great. And if not, you have the time to deal with the issue and properly fix it.
You never admit the actual amount of time it takes to finish a job. If you did, your days would be packed.
Isn't that lying?
No, it's creative estimating.
Dendi, how long will it take to repair a biobed?
Oh, that would take about 5 hours.
Excuse me? That's great!
Temporal Edict shows what happens when you remove buffer time like that and only delegate exactly enough time to get a certain task done. Everybody is overworked, stressed out, and can't deal with new problems or threats as they develop. And let me tell you, as an overworked and overstressed millennial, is that ever a relevant concept?
I have to assist with a surgery, and I honestly can't remember which deck sickbay is on.
26?
Is that... do we have that many?
It's like an Amazon warehouse in space. The B-plot also runs with another Star Trek trope, the fight to the death. After getting captured by hostile aliens and being forced to fight their champion, Mariner and Ransom end up squabbling over who gets to do it so they can save their crewmates and escape. Not to mention, this episode has my favorite quote in the series so far.
Oh god, I'm gonna die!
We live on a spaceship. Nobody is dying from a spear wound.
In fact, I'd say this episode is where Mariner's characterization finally clicks. She's still an opinionated loudmouth, but that doesn't translate to her being right all the time or being the only person who can solve their predicament.
Permission to speak freely?
You always speak freely. Nobody can stop you from speaking freely.
All right.
Despite the bad impression you could very easily get of her in the first episode, Mariner ends up developing into a very three-dimensional character. We've seen that she has a hard time with Starfleet's bureaucracy and just wants to be a badass space adventurer, but we also see the price she's paid for her insubordinate attitude. She has few career opportunities and even fewer friends, since they've either ditched her or gotten promoted way past her level.
Captain Ramsey speaks fondly of your time at the Academy.
Oh boy, what'd she tell you?
Curious that you're still an ensign.
Judging from the first 2 seasons, I'd say Mariner's main flaw is the same as her mother's. They both need to exert control over everything at all times and always have to be in the right. And if everyone else doesn't agree, well, then suddenly it's everyone else who's the problem.
Are you sure that's the best rock for this?
What? Yes, it's fine. It's a rock.
Look, I'm just saying, I think you should use the shale over there.
Mom, it is the same thing. Just leave me alone.
It's just maybe you'd want one with more of a point.
Oh my god!
You know that old phrase, if you don't see the asshole, it's probably you? Well, give Mariner a mirror and a pair of binoculars and she probably still won't notice. The show also acknowledges how, frankly, it would be stressful living in the Star Trek universe. You know how often the Federation gets secretly invaded by malevolent species? There's one episode where Mariner suspects something is up with Boimler's new girlfriend, and she throws out all kinds of possibilities. Gotta say though, I don't know why Garrick is in the middle of her conspiracy board. I mean, what harm could plain simple Garrick do? I'm telling you, this motherfucker is always involved somehow! I can't prove it, but he is! This kind of stuff forms the crux of most of the episodes. Finding out what happens with all those weird anomalies the crew discovers, finding out what happens when a crew member comes back from the dead, what they do to all those evil supercomputers that keep trying to take over entire civilizations, etc. The show also really starts to have some fun paying homage to famous moments from the franchise's past. My favorite has to be Crisis Point, the episode that pays tribute to the Star Trek movies. We've got all the tropes and cliches here. We've got unnecessarily long glory shots of the ship. We've got lens flare. We've got a hammy over-the-top villain. They crash the ship. They have fistfights to the death. We've got heroic sacrifices. And the most important detail, beaming can do anything.
I initiated a rapid repeating emergency transport sequence and beamed the entire crew before we crashed.
What? That's not possible.
No, it's a movie. You can beam whatever you want. You can do all sorts of beaming stuff in a movie.
What?
But then something interesting happens as the show goes on. It stops being a comedy set in the world of Star Trek, and it just becomes a Star Trek show that happens to be funny. As the cringe humor finally starts to melt away, we're left with a show that has a clear passion for all things Trek. And more importantly, it's the bright, hopeful Star Trek that wasn't afraid to wear its heart on its sleeve. The Trek that was all about unity and finding simple pleasure in exploring the galaxy. The Cerritos crew may be a bunch of goofballs, but they're still Starfleet. They're still the best and the brightest. As time goes on, it becomes oddly satisfying to see them drop the goofy attitude and man their stations when Red Alert hits. Part of the fun of being a Star Trek fan is imagining what day-to-day life would be like in the Federation, and we get to see that as we get to know the cast better.
I'm sorry, I gotta be honest, I didn't join Starfleet to get in phaser fights. I signed up to explore, to be out in space making new discoveries and peaceful diplomatic solutions. That's boldly going. That stuff may not seem as cool as what you guys do, but it's Starfleet, all the way.
I got into Starfleet to study moss.
I joined up because I love beaming.
For most of the first season, Lower Decks takes serious stories and makes them funny. In the first season finale, however, they switch things up. They take something previously funny and make it serious. In the cold open, we see another Federation ship, the Solbank, get decimated by an alien vessel of unknown origin, featuring cobbled together parts from dozens of different species. When the Cerritos gets attacked by the same vessel later in the episode, the enemy is revealed, and it's one we haven't seen in a very long time.
Ho, ho, ho! I thought the Enterprise was strong. We are strong.
This isn't the Enterprise. This is the Cerritos.
We thought you were the Enterprise.
Hacklids? What the hell do you want?
Oh boy, the Packlids. They're not just a one-off villain, they're a one-off villain from Season 2 of TNG, so you know it's bad. If you've never watched the episode Samaritan Snare, don't. It's not good. How Boimler describes the Packlids is accurate. They would trick other ships into helping them, then steal their technology because they were too dim-witted to develop their own. The thing is, the writers on TNG overshot it by making them too dim-witted.
We are smart.
We need their computer things.
Here, Lower Decks shows what happens when a group like that goes unchecked. Turns out the Packlets have become very, very good at stealing other ships' technology in the last 30 years. It looks like they might be totally screwed until they get saved by a familiar face.
Red alert! A Packlet party and I wasn't invited?
It's about time you showed up, Will.
Let me tell you, as the person who had to put up with the Packlets the first time we saw them, it must be very satisfying for Riker to finally lay the smackdown on them. Oh, f*** those guys! I'm on my way! Red alert! Maximum warp! We're gonna go beat some Packlet ass! This episode is when Lower Decks finally opens itself up to the larger Star Trek universe and starts including characters we haven't seen in a really long time. And the advantage of animation is that it doesn't matter how much the actors have aged in real life, since we only need their voices. We've got Riker, Leia Brahms, the original Borg Queen, and technically speaking, John Delancey reprised Q here before he did on Picard. And it turns out everybody's rightfully done with his shit.
Get out of here, Q! No, we are done with random stuff today. We're not dealing with any of your Q bullshit.
Oh, s'il vous plaît, Mariner. I want to put humanity to the ultimate test.
Okay, I'm not French. No, go find Picard.
Oh, Picard. He's no fun.
In fact, they use returning characters most effectively in the second season finale, when they bring back Sonia Gomez for the first time in 30 years. Turns out, she's come a long way since spilling hot chocolate on Picard, becoming captain of her own vessel.
I'm okay. Please don't. It's fine.
Don't worry about it. I've done way worse in front of much more intimidating captains.
Unfortunately, her ship's power gets knocked out and is sent careening towards an innocent planet. This is probably the best episode of the show thus far, because once the Cerritos leaps into action, it feels like a regular Star Trek episode that just happens to be peppered with jokes. No Star Trek fan worth their weight in latinum is gonna let Sonia Gomez die. But going back to the Roddenberry Box, while the show does stick to Jean's hopeful vision of the future, the first attack from the Packlets does offer something of a rebuttal. Earlier in that same episode, Captain Freeman was bemoaning the fact that a race from the TOS era had regressed to the point that they were worshipping the malevolent supercomputer that had taken over their civilization a century before.
Consume the intruders! Obey Landru!
Hey, don't make me paradox you into destroying yourself.
Landru apologizes!
And after the Packlet attack, she realizes that ignoring them for as long as they did let them become an even bigger threat because nobody took them seriously. Mike McMahon confirmed in an interview that he intended this as an allegory for the return of fascism in the 21st century. We all thought, what, these assholes again? Not realizing they had spent all that time coordinating unnoticed because everyone thought that they were ridiculous. As Mariner says, we can't expect people to keep making the right decisions a century down the line. Gene Roddenberry conceived of a future where all of humanity's personal conflicts were resolved and we finally got to travel the stars together. Lower Decks is the first Star Trek series I can think of that says, yes, humanity has come a long way, but we can still improve. We can still be better. So as I start to wrap this up, there's still the question lingering in the air. Can Star Trek be funny? Well, let me answer that question with another question. Do you know how many parodies of Star Trek there are? Dozens, hundreds, thousands. Entire TV shows have been built around making fun of Star Trek. Entire feature films have been built around making fun of Star Trek. And some fans like them more than official Star Trek films. I say, why not let Star Trek get in on the action? And believe it or not, this is one of the things I like the most about this current era of Star Trek. Trek is at its most boring when it tries to stick to the middle of the road and play it safe. It's at its best when it takes risks and gives us something we haven't seen before. And fortunately, the powers that be finally realized that Star Trek doesn't have to be one thing. Star Trek can be anything. It can be high concept and inventive. It can be dark and gritty. It can be bright and hopeful. It can be colorful and lighthearted. It can be ponderous. It can be tragic. And yes, it can be funny. I'm old enough to remember when Star Trek ran out of steam, and for a while it looked like that was going to be it. But fortunately, it looks like there's still plenty of the galaxy left to explore.
A view like this makes you realize it doesn't matter what deck you work on. We're all in it together. And they left us. How much oxygen do we have? A lot? A little? Ballpark?